So hello everyone, and welcome to our second meeting of this new series of the Phinance Network titled In Conversation, Exploring the Philosophy of Money and Finance. And this series features several interviews, and today we are excited to have Aaron James, who will be interviewed by Richard Endörfer. Thank you very much, Aaron and Richard, for accepting our invitation. And today's interview is titled Money in the Social Contract, and is inspired by a chapter authored by Aaron in the recently published book, The Philosophy of Money and Finance, published for University Press, Oxford University Press, and edited by Joachim Sandberg and Lisa Warensky. And before we begin, I'd like to extend my thanks to the organizers of this series, so Joachim and Lisa, for making this possible. As you probably know, after the interview, we will have an open debate. You can ask your question raising your virtual hand by clicking the button at the bottom of the Zoom menu, and I will manage the queue. And so basically, that's all from me for now, and let's begin the interview and enjoy.
All right. I think I can take over here. My thanks to Emiliano, Joachim, and Lisa for putting this great event together, and of course to Aaron for participating. So I will be conducting the interview with Aaron today. My name is Richard, as Emiliano has already said. Let me first say a couple of words about Aaron to give you a more general introduction. So, Aaron James is a professor of philosophy at UC Irvine. Please let me know if I get any of this wrong, Aaron, by the way.
Oh, no problem.
His research his research interests are primarily in ethics and political philosophy. His research in ethics currently focuses primarily on Scanlonian contractualism, and specifically on a lot of his research also looks at risk-sensitive approaches to contractualism, as well as rationalism and the foundations of moral and practical judgment. In political philosophy, Aaron is working on a number of issues. He has been working on issues relating to the fairness in the global economy, and more he's looking at money and in moral and political philosophy. And this is partly what we will be focusing today. So thank you for being here with us today, Aaron. Before we begin, I have a small little anecdote of how I personally met Aaron for the first time. And even though it's one of these stories where I'm not quite sure if it's appropriate to tell them, I think Aaron should hear it because it's very flattering.
Okay.
So, the first time I actually met Aaron, and he might not remember because I was a master's student back in those days, was in 2014 at the University of Bayreuth, where Aaron gave a great talk on fairness in the global economy. And the very next day, my professor for political philosophy wanted to discuss what Aaron has presented. But before he did that, he said, okay, so you've all met Aaron yesterday, and he's this extremely bright philosopher. Also, he's a surfer, and on top of that, he is just unbelievably handsome. So, and these are like word by word. This is a direct quote from him. If you have a feeling that there is some cosmic injustice going on here, you might just be right.
Surfing makes you handsome, I think.
Well, what I can just tell you, the only words that always come to my mind whenever I'm reading something from you, Aaron, is cosmic injustice.
Uh,
It
thanks
is
for
the same. It is the same time with this piece, which was absolutely excellent. With that being said, let me move on to the questions, if that's all right with you.
yeah.
Great, cool. Okay, so before anything else, could you take us through the key arguments in your chapter and quickly summarize its main conclusion?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, all of you, for both organizing this, putting on hosting, and attending. This is really fun. It's a really good idea to do these kinds of things about a chapter, as I was saying before, one I hadn't thought of before. So the main claims, so the broader thing is having, I mean, a little bit of backdrop is for me is, after I wrote a book about fairness in the global economy in 2012, sort of around the time of the great financial crisis, then over the years, I spent a lot more time thinking about money and finance and started thinking about what conventional neoclassical economics sort of might have wrong about money and money management. And then I came to think that it had, at least overlooking a lot of really important things, and that political philosophy, partly because of its deference sort of because of Rawls, I think, his deference to neoclassical economics, had also then sort of neglected a lot of really important aspects of money and monetary institutions, banking, things like that. And in particular, I came to think that that money and banking are sort of part and parcel of just society, right? And raise the basic questions of both justice and legitimacy, where legitimacy is a subset of justice questions that political philosophy is after. And so this paper is sort of, it's just a sort of, it's focusing on certain aspects of redemption of debts in state monies, and but it's trying to tease out a way that there's an intrinsically normative issue that can look like an issue of legitimacy, as a way of saying, like, look, money and banking are already inherently normative phenomenon in a certain sense. They inherently raise questions of moral legitimacy that are part and parcel of the sort of subject matter of political philosophy, part and parcel of the assessment of society, social institutions, and such, and can't really just be separated out. There I'm drawing from the financier and diplomat A. Mitchell Innes, his credit theory of money. And for him, he thinks part and parcel of a credit economy is the right of satisfaction, as he calls it. That's a right to have a debt accepted in settlement, a debt and settlement of another debt, and redemption. The confidence in that right of satisfaction is part and parcel of a credit economy. He says it is credit all over the world, like, so it's like a customary right. To develop that idea, I developed sort of the way that debt swaps can work, sort of by what you might call natural law principles, and I explicate that within contractualist moral theory. It's just to get at how the logic of the debt swap works and the moral sort of principle behind it. But what's required for my argument isn't substantive moral truths, although I find them plausible, but just the idea that when there's a credit economy, there's customary recognition of a right to redemption of a certain kind. That's how I interpret Innes. And then, but now crucially, another crucial claim here is that a credit economy that runs on a right of satisfaction can operate without a state. So I don't think of Innes' credit theory or the truth about credit theories, truth about money, to depend on a state issuance. So that's in contrast with state theories like Kant's theory or chartalist theories like Knapp's view. And this is an interesting picture. I think this is what Innes is saying, and it's also plausible. I feel like I can motivate and defend it independently. But then the idea is that when states issue money or authorize money issuance or regulate it, manage banks issuing in the name of the public, for example, a fundamental thing they're doing is they're entering an independent kind of credit economy. And then the right of satisfaction, and rights of redemption, the more sort of internal morality of a credit economy, then constrains and applies to state money issuance, sort of from below, as it were. And that's already a way that state money issuance and management is then constrained by a kind of underlying customary and maybe sort of natural law, contractually justified kind of set of principles. And that's one kind of legitimacy requirement that applies then to exercise of state power that money is. But then it sort of connects pretty seamlessly, I think, with a broader notion of legitimacy, the kind you find in Rawls, where Rawls doesn't focus on money and banking, but you can think of the kind of confidence you have to have in social cooperation as confidence in money and monetary institutions, and your ability to get a hold of it, your ability to be accepted when presented for payment of tax debts, your ability to, your confidence it'll be accepted in redemption of goods and services, or rental payment of your rent or your mortgage, or things like this. So that general kind of confidence is part and parcel of the kind of confidence that, from an Rawlsian point of view, is needed for legitimacy of social institutions and the state. And so I think you should think of a social contract there as a monetary social contract, really in the first instance. I mean, because at least for modern states, money is one of the central ways that we organize society and get people to do things. And if you didn't have that, we're talking about a radically different and much smaller, in a way smaller, or very different kind of society. So anyway, so that's just going very quickly over some of the main themes.
Yeah, you really did. There's absolutely a lot in this article, I think. So the first question that I really wanted to ask you regarding the article, more specifically, is you have a very particular conception of money that you put forward and that you defend against the commodity and chartist views of what money is. So can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, what precisely this conception is? You've already talked a little bit about it, but maybe if you could expand on it a little bit, that would be great. Why you chose to embrace it, and why it is beneficial for our moral and political philosophy to have the right conception of what money is.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, I think of the sort of taxonomy of views about money as sort of roughly, there's sort of traditional commodity theories, then there's credit theories, and then state money theories. And the way I think that the most plausible state money theories are really just credit theories. They think that the only reliable creditor is the state. Except Kant maybe doesn't have that view. He might be a pure state money theorist, although the language of credit and debt is not really explicit. It might be under the surface, but it's not explicit in this quick discussion of the metaphysics of morals. Maybe Fichte is not explicit about that too. But so I sort of think of it as like it's either the credit and then for reasons I already suggested, and I could go into more. I think the state money, a state-based credit theory, is too narrow because you can have lots of credit cooperatives, in which sorry, this was my word. Oh, my dog. Is that really not loud? I can't hear myself think when she does this. Hey, come here.
We don't hear too much. At least I don't.
Oh, okay, good. Oh, good. She stopped. It's a miracle. Sorry about that. It might happen again. I'm doing everything I know how to do to coax her down. I can just hold her actually too. I'll do that next time if it happens. And that's because there can be genuine credit cooperatives, or they can be sort of two kinds. One I mentioned briefly is just there could be without banks. So just a small community of, say, buyers and sellers, because of the inconveniences of barter, they issue IOUs that are accepted amongst them for settlement of debts, or among the butcher and the baker, candlestick maker, etc. Right, and those can circulate sort of, as it were, with a kind of implicit understanding that these debts issued by each of them are acceptable in payment, and then they circulate like money. And now each of them are issuers. They're all bankers, as it were. There are no sort of there's no one specifically doing banking. I think that can be a genuinely monetary system, and there can be different scales, and there's various versions of realistic versions of this kind of thing. But similarly, you could have a division of labor such that one of the jobs is the banker to issue the IOUs, and then everyone else accepts those IOUs in settlement of the commercial debts amongst them. And you could have more than one banker, and you could have a monetary economy with banking. So it's got a hierarchy of credit because the banker has higher credibility of redemption than the rest of the parties, and that can be a functioning monetary system without a state, or in the shadow of the state, or without any state recognition. So this can be a kind of anarchist dream or libertarian dream or whatever without any state. That's a full-fledged monetary system. I think there's limits maybe on its scale. There's limits on maybe the quality of the monies that could be attained, the confidence that you could have in those monies. That could be they might be very unstable money economies, prone to crisis and stuff. So all that could have lots of features that are undesirable from a social point of view, and that's where you might want a state to manage or issue the money. But that the state money theory per se doesn't get at those dynamics by distinguishing money and credit, and so that's just a problem, I think, for the state money theory, and it's a way that sort of traditional classical economics is right to think that money and banking are endogenous, as it were. They come from within, from below. They inform state and constrain the state in various ways. That's and including ideas of confidence. That's all correct. I think the sort of orthodox tradition is correct, and the state money theory is just doesn't get those insights right. But the way that now the sort of more orthodox commodity theory is wrong is it just leaves the normative dimensions of credit and debt settlement of payment is just settlement of a debt out of the picture. I mean, the theory doesn't really get at it in a way a credit theory does. And that's a fundamental problem with it, I think. I mean, that's the fundamental sort of intellectual theoretical problem with it, is it just doesn't explain how payment is possible. It doesn't make that explicit. I mean, you've got stuff moving between hands, goods and some good, a good goes from here to there. Why is not just a bartered exchange? Well, to explain why the difference between barter and monetary payment in money, you have to talk about the debt that's owed for one of the, your apples change hands. I have them now. I owe you. Well, how do I settle my debt to you? Well, if it's a monetary payment, then that's going to be using another debt to settle my debt to you, and that's monetary payment. So you have to explain those dynamics to get at how a difference between barter and monetary payment. Even barter is a kind of still a swap of debts of a certain kind, but it's negotiated and not done in terms of an independent debt obligation. But none of these they're broadly normative dynamics, in a broad sense normative, not expressly moral yet. For that you need to add the other things about redemption, rights of satisfaction, redemption principle, etc., which I can say more about. But that's the key thing. And there's some other problems that come up, like Keynes mentions in passing, that if you're only talking about goods changing hands, you haven't left the realm of barter. And I think you can develop that thought by focusing on ways that commodities can circulate, sort of in a way that Menger explains, so that they have sellability of a certain kind. But then that doesn't explain how there's still yet money. They still might be barter because there's expectations about future acceptance in bartered trades, and there's broad enough so something might be a kind of saleable commodity, but yet there's still the question of what makes it money is still an open question. And then you have to talk about credit and debt and payment in order to get at why that is. And they can be saleable too. And Menger's story doesn't really get at that. So it's sort of underdetermined, under-theorized to actually get at the dynamics of payment. The orthodox tradition will just waffle oftentimes between talk of exchange and payment, and then just act like they've got a story about like these things, but they just don't seem to. So anyway, that's a rough contrast. So that's why if you just eliminate, if you eliminate the state theory, you eliminate the commodity theory, you're left with a credit theory.
Yeah, I mean that seems to make sense. Yeah, and I also found that while reading through your article, that your arguments for embracing this kind of credit debt relationship view of money, I found them to be very convincing, actually.
Oh, good.
However, there's still this very last question that I wanted to get at a little bit earlier, which is, what happens if we have the wrong view of money, right? What does that do to our political philosophy? What does that do to our conceptions of justice, and so on and so forth? Is there any danger that if we get this particular thing wrong, that we might err fundamentally in other fields of our political philosophy?
Yeah, I think there is a way of connecting. I think the dangers are really important. I mean, one is if you're a commodity theorist and you say the thing that neoclassical economist tends to say, which is, then it looks like money is just a neutral veil for the real economy of exchange of goods and services. And then banking, if it's just an intermediary, is similarly neutral. That gets you, that leaves sort of, then you're supposed to look through the veil, like see the real, right? And so, and now that has its own sort of limits from an explanatory point of view. rules out possibility of booms and busts, as Keynes pointed out, and then how you should think about the state's reaction to crisis is, becomes more complicated. That's a sort of point about within economics. There's dangers from the commodity theory of money within economics. Within political philosophy, there is a danger. I think Rawls basically saddled us all with this problem, which is because he was so deferential to neoclassical economics. I have a whole paper explaining this, how this is so, and why he could have seen differently because he had read Lerner at some point. Abba Lerner had come and explained how state finance works in a different way. But I have a story about how it was sort of in effect deferential to Samuelson and Friedman, and then sort of punted on the question. But then, in effect, the political philosophy theory of justice is then treating money and banking as a neutral veil, as sort of relatively inconsequential, or as a technocratic issue that just has to get resolved. It's not really something that raises really important issues. And it's behind this sort of thing that became a division of labor in political philosophy, which became standard, which was something like political philosophers saying, well, we're going to leave finance, money, banking, including fiscal discipline, like whether or not you go with balanced budgets and how you manage inflation. We're going to leave all those institutional questions to the economists and political economists. We're going to assume that they're going to do that with proper social scientific scruple, and then we're going to do the normative issues over here, and then just proceed, and then we're going to figure out what the result is. We're going to figure out what the right principles or right outcomes are, and then the economists are just going to tell us what institutions are best to get us those outcomes. So that sort of instrumentalist picture of monetary and banking institutions now, like one really crucial way there's a danger there, for example, is here's this. The whole Rawls-Nozick debate about the trade-off between liberty and equity is framed upon a specific monetary regime, a kind of so-called sound finance, because as both Rawls expressly says, and then Nozick assumes, the idea is that if you're going to give benefits to the least well-off, you have to tax somebody, and then they're raising a threat of liberty to the person who has the property. So she's got this tax and transfer model of how you're benefiting, doing the best off, doing as well as you can for the poor. Rawls says, yeah, do it. And Nozick says, no, violates liberty. Later Rawls-Nozick debate is saying, well, how sharp is the trade-off, right? But there is a real trade-off there fundamentally now. And that's just only works within a certain fiscal monetary set of regimes that you might think political philosophy should question and not frame its allegedly fundamental trade-offs around, right? So I think that was catastrophic. And it took a long time for people to figure out that, well, look, a lot of distribution is pre-distribution, and it's not really just about this simple trade-off and stuff like that. And that started to get said, but what still hasn't happened, and what I hope we all make happen, is that we take seriously the way that money and banking are really part and parcel of pre-distribution in an economy in the state, and start to rethink questions of distributive justice in a deeper way that's sensitive to the institutional nature of these monetary dynamics, right? So that to me, there's this glaring lack now in political philosophy, including a lack of understanding of just basically how things work. One I grew up with just, and had to sort of piece it all together myself by realizing there's a lot I didn't understand, and feeling like there was a problem there. And so I'm hoping we all get political philosophy up to speed on this. Not ultimately, I blame Rawls, and then for this, for all of his contributions. I think he just really messed up this side of his thought. So that's a danger on the political philosophy side of. Yeah, I don't know. Is that enough? Well, maybe if you're a state, let me add this. If you're a state theorist, state money theorist, there are some benefits to that from a political philosophy point of view, because then there's an emphasis on public finance and state money issuance as something that's as a state responsibility, and is going to then raise straightforwardly questions of legitimacy and equity and justice and stuff like that. But it's not going to, I think that's going to give you only a partial story, because it's not going to give you a good account of how legitimacy, equity, and justice connect with all the things that the Orthodox tradition emphasizes, which is the endogenous nature of money and banking, and the ways that confidence and monetary dynamics are really part and parcel of the question of legitimacy. So the way I think you should think about it is there's money and banking are at the nexus of sort of state legitimacy and sort of broad sort of cooperation. And the legitimacy and equity issues of the institutions at that nexus are really part and parcel of how to think about legitimacy and equity and justice in the social contract, theory, and in a way that pushes pressure against other forms of theory. But I think so. You need to think about the nexus of the state money society nexus. You need to think about how that works in order to get an adequate normative conception of the subject matter, like market oriented, mixed economy, mixed finance, science kinds of societies. Anyway, okay, that was a long answer. Sorry, I'm trying to.
No, that is absolutely great, because I think it really gets to the very bottom issues of what you want to discuss, right? Like, what conception of money we have definitely has a huge impact on the kinds of political theories we think are relevant and actually should debate it in academic and public circles. So I think this is extremely helpful. Let me go in a little bit of detail on the redemption principle. So on page 233, you write that if states were not to abide by the redemption principle, we would be denied an important kind of freedom. So what kind of freedom do you think precisely is at stake here? And could you maybe summarize the redemption principle really quickly for
Okay, yeah.
against it?
Yeah, so the redemption principle is my explication of what Innes means by the right of satisfaction, and that there the idea is that if I come to you wanting to settle a debt with you, a debt I owe to you, and I'm offering your debt owed to me in settlement, and now let's just assume these are comparable value. They might be denominated as same value or might be informal. I'm presenting this instead of like we're square, so that we should just sort of offset these debts, count that as payment without any further goings on. Then I have a right to have you as you're my creditor in this case, and also my debtor, and I have a right to avail myself of a sort of, if I request it, I can insist that the debt is settled. So what you don't have, the contrast here would be a sort of, this is a kind of promissory right, but it's not a kind of the kind of promissory right that the moral philosophy literature tends to focus, moral and legal philosophy literature tends to focus on, because they'll focus on promissory rights that entail specific performance, a right to specific performance. So if I promise you that I'll do some action phi, then you have a right as the promisee to my doing phi unless you release me, right? So, but in this case, the promissory IOU we might owe different IOUs to each other. But in this case, whether or not there's specific performance, it's just the outstanding, the swap of debts is supposed to settle the obligation, right? Even without any further performance. So I have some like examples of that without monetary cases, like I promise you to walk your dog and you promise me to pick me up at the airport. And then instead of performing the specific actions promised, we just call it even, as it were. We just swap those debts off to each other. The assets and liabilities cancel basically to zero because they're comparably valued. So that's now either of us in this case can demand that settlement or request for us. It's fair for us to ask for that settlement. If the debts are comparably valued, then they should cancel. And that right is a right of satisfaction. And the redemption principle, as I just formulated, just sort of fleshes out a version of that, like that story. Okay, so that's supposed to be true. There's supposed to be possible versions of that even in a state of nature or even in two-person cases, with these informal promises. But I'm saying that that is the kind of thing that has to be recognized within a credit economy, especially when a state is a party to the credit economy, a party where the state is both a money issuer, it's issuing IOUs, money, dollars, for example, which are debts on the government. So that's the government's debt and my credit if I have the dollars. And the debt's also then imposing an obligation, a legal obligation on me, which is my debt and its credit on me, right? So there's the reverse set. So I'm both creditor and debtor, it's creditor and debtor. Now what happens now, when I go to settle my debt to it or to the public, say in the form of a tax obligation or fees or fines or whatever, or court issued penalties or something like that, those debts to the public, when those are settled, the way they get settled is I'm using the government, say US government debt, dollars, non-interest bearing, like to go and I'm presenting them to the government officials who are in charge of, accepting these things. And I'm saying, look, please cancel the debt I owe you, the government, the public, by swapping the debt that you owe to me in the form of dollars. Okay, so I'm proposing that when I go to the tax office or I send my check to the IRS or whatever, like, that's what I'm proposing. I'm proposing redemption of the debt, the dollar debts on the government, and settlement of my debt to the government. Okay, so now the redemption principle applies, I say, and has to apply. Here's what it would be for it to be violated. You're at the tax office. Let's say these are still like in-house offices. I don't know if they still exist, but but the guy behind the counter, he looks at what you want. Like, well, what's in it for me? He's like, I'm hungry. Is there lunch in this for me? Like, I don't know. No, sorry, come back later. Or, or no, sorry, we're not gonna accept your money's no good here. And now what's at stake here is I'm on the hook for incarceration, wage garnishment, all kinds of coercive penalties by the state if I don't get this debt to the public settled. Now, but this guy, he's just arbitrarily, as you might say, refusing to recognize my claim to have us call it even, have my debt settled by presentation of dollars. He's not recognizing. There's a promise of redemption that comes to give the dollars credibility, and he's not recognizing that promise. He's not recognizing my right to satisfaction as a result. He's violating the redemption principle. Now, that would be a violation of liberty also. It's a form of arbitrary treatment because he doesn't have the right kinds of reasons to accept. Right? His job is just to keep the government's promise and to redeem and settle these debts. And he's not doing it for arbitrary reasons, like because there's nothing in it for him, or because he doesn't feel in the mood, or he's got indigestion and he's come back later or never. So those are all wrongs, administrative wrongs. They're a form of administrative tyranny. They're also, I think, a form of lack of liberty because I am not immune to incarceration as long as my debt to the government remains outstanding. And so my liberty and the institutional mechanism we have for me to regain immunity against incarceration is by tendering payment, settling the debt. But everything depends on this guy penciling in the books, like entering in the computer that my debt to the government is paid. If he doesn't do that, then I lack immunity. I'm now liable to arrest. I'm liable to wage garnishment, whatever. Okay. So that's my liberty is infringed until and only a protection was restored for the year until my debt comes up again. We only get liberty on a year by year basis get on the monetary system. Every April 15th decides whether you're free for the next year. So that's
ideally.
Ideally, yeah. If you pay. So it's Republican. That way of putting it is a sort of Republican liberty frame. So you're subject to arbitrary treatment unless there's accountability. Accountability is getting this guy to do accounting, settlement of the debt, and otherwise I'm left to the discretion of the officials who can arrest me anytime on the grounds that I haven't paid, that I'm a tax debtor.
So it is very much this extremely direct idea of freedom, which actually has to do with incarceration. There's a direct connection to that. All right, but with that being said, I think we should open the floor from here on, so others can ask some questions. To all of those who haven't had the great pleasure of reading Aaron's chapter yet, I can highly recommend it. It is full of very, very interesting insights. I wish I could have asked you some more questions, but I think we should really open the floor now because I'm sure that other people also want to ask you some things. Thank you, Aaron. Very much appreciated that you participated. All right, so let's open the floor then.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Aaron and Richard, for this insightful interview. So yes, you were saying we can now begin the debate. And so to ask questions, please raise your virtual hand by clicking the button on the bottom of the Zoom menu, and we manage the queue. Good. I mean, I have questions, of course, and I can start to break the ice. Otherwise, yeah, I don't see questions coming from the audience right now. Okay, I have a question for you, Aaron. And I was thinking of the digital currencies and the way they fit or not your framework. And so how do they come into this well-structured view of justice and freedom, and also the way they work and the different types of cryptos and stable coins and digital dollars fit your picture? That's my question.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So, I mean, so all these, I don't know, call them ledger assets or something. So there's things like, I don't know, Bitcoin or other crypto assets, which, can have the price changes goes up over time and people can bet on price changes and want to sort of own or control that asset. So, and I think of them as just speculative assets. Now, like they could in principle become money if they're widely recognized in settlement of debts in some community. And it wouldn't have to be state recognized either. They wouldn't have to be even parity for dollars. They could just, so there could be some like a community, I don't know, like a billionaire libertarian experiment, like, of like a boat flotilla off of Tahiti. This is a real project. like they'll use crypto assets for settlement among debts for, a cabana or a snorkel or gas for your boat or whatever. Like, so they use certain crypto assets, I don't know, designated ones, and the ones that aren't too unstable or whatever, for settlement of debts amongst them. So in that community, and this could run independently of any state monies or state recognition, other than sort of permission, just do what you want, that a crypto asset could function as a money in that case, because it's just sort of functioning as the unit of account. And then maybe the ledger technology is getting used for keeping track of the ownership rights. So they could become money in principle if they were widely enough accepted in a community. And it could be a small community. They would only count as money in a broader sense that rivals state monies if they were very broadly accepted in the way that state monies are accepted. And unless there were sort of state backing for them, or at least state encouragement or non-obstruction, I doubt that would just happen. And I don't think it's necessarily desirable to happen, but again, in theory, it could happen if a state were to recognize. But now that point is I think of that as a very trivial point that I just made, because it's relatively easy to create a money. I mean, you just need any unit of account that's recognized as settlement of debt, settling debts within a community. We can just arbitrarily select a unit of account and just agree upon that as a way of denominating our credit and debts within a community, and then we exchange those. I mean, why bother with the ledger technology and all the internet connection to crypto assets, and then the instabilities and the worries about theft or privacy or whatever? Like, don't even worry about that. We can just, if we're one of these little communities and we want to issue our own money, we just issue our own, you just create our own unit of account, Tahitis or whatever, call them Tahitis, and then we just denominate all our debts in Tahiti. All the prices are listed in bungalow prices in Tahitis, like people by joining the association get a certain number of Tahitis. They're spendable, we can have some kind of cooperative allocation and creation and, initial endowment of these things, something like that. I mean, just make it up. I mean, it's just conventionally adopted, because what matters is its function as recognized as amongst us as settlement debts. Now, there's a question there about what it takes for recognition to happen. And when you have a state involved, there's a legal form of recognition where this is, like, say, dollars are declared a unit of account. They're then promised in acceptance of debts that are also denominated in dollars. And then there's acceptance at the tax office, and then there's banks that are licensed to issue in that unit of account. And that's, putting most of the money dollars there are in circulation, for example. So that's a form of formal legal recognition that happens, but that and how does that happen? I don't think that's necessary, formal legal recognition, or let alone state recognition. But there is a kind of, what is recognition? This is a hard question. I have an article in Synthes trying to get at this. And I think it's just a certain kind of ideational recognition, that is, enough people accept that enough other people accept something as a unit of account, as settling debts within a certain monetary community. That's enough for it to function as an quote recognized form of money. So that's pretty thin. It's just a kind of intersubjective, awareness or acceptance, that no one even has to actually themselves accept the unit of account as money. Tahiti's, count as settling bungalow debts. No one has to accept a norm of that the one thing counts as settling debts. They just have to think that enough other people accept those things, and as long as there's enough reason to believe that, and keying into people's heuristics for judging these things, then you can have it, Tahiti's function as in settlement debts and in exchange as a genuine monetary economy. So this all can just be bootstrapped into existence for sort of implicit agreements of a certain kind. It doesn't require anything so fancy, no fancy technology as crypto assets and such.
Thank you, Aaron, for your very interesting, interesting answer. I see Violet Victoria wants to make a question, so the floor is yours, Victoria.
Thank you. Yeah, you talked about some of the issues with having the wrong theory of money. I'm curious who needs to have the right theory for us to avoid some of the problems. Like, do we need to get all of the citizens on board with the correct sort of money's republic view, or is it sufficient to have the central bank people know, or the government know? Who needs to have the right theory for us to avoid some of the issues they've discussed?
I guess there's different problems for different. I mean, I mentioned the problems with political philosophers not being attuned to money, and that has certain theoretical limitations on how much they can understand and explain. Then there's economists or maybe central bankers, insofar as they have the wrong. I mean, I don't think central bankers do generally have the wrong views of money. I think they tend to think it is credit and debt relations, and they'll tend to have fairly high level views about the inflation management risks and what kinds of monetary fiscal regimes are default. But those are a different kind of sort of issue. But then it can, I think, having the wrong views of money or the wrong views of larger scale monetary institutions can lead to sort of a bias in favor of certain bad decisions, or bias against certain possible, totally feasible and good, realistic institutional possibilities. So that's a sort of technocratic error that I think can happen even among people who have a good fundamental understanding of money. I think because they're too tied to sort of commodity theory thinking, for example, they might not think of certain possibilities. I mean, a lot of times when you talk to central bankers, they're, oh yeah, we could do that, but that's not our legal mandate. It's just a legal political legitimacy constraint a lot of times. So, but I think still within central banking, debates about central banking, its relation to division of monetary fiscal responsibility, a lot of that debate, is still constrained by certain background assumptions that I think are too much shaped by residual effects of sort of commodity style thinking or neutral veil type thinking, and not enough informed by the idea of money as a public thing that we issue and allocate as an expression of our public credit. And but that doesn't settle any of the delicate empirical issues, but it does, I think, if you have the right a better normative, it does reduce bias towards certain bad answers, or it does mean that the scope of feasible, eligible, possible sets of monetary institutions aren't artificially constrained because of bad theories of money, as I would think of it. So, but then the point applies to the larger public as well, just insofar as, I mean, it's just it's very common for all of us to just be really confused about money, oblivious to what it is, what it does, and it's partly because of our just lack of confusion or lack of deep understanding. Well, and that's very tied to certain eras. There's been eras which the political nature of money or the nature of money as credit has been much more prominently understood within ordinary politics. Late 1900s, for example, it was, I mean, like sort of in the debates about monetary politics leading up to the establishment of the Federal Reserve, and there was 19th century, I meant, not 1900s. Yeah, like yeah, there was very, like there was much more awareness, but since we sort of since forgotten, maybe got into amnesia about, not amnesia, but just sort of not been politically salient, so we've lost understanding. And that's created opportunity for sort of convenient politicking among pundits and politicians, just basically so convenient myths about money, that if the public had a better understanding of money as credit and is not constrained in certain kinds of ways that it's often assumed to be, even though you do need to constrain it and discipline it in other kinds of ways, that we'd have better public debate and public understanding about that. Yeah. So anyway, how about that? Or an answer?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
So is part of what you're saying that the kind of legal mandate that we give to, let's say, central banks, sometimes that mandate is maybe incorrect because it was created in light of a flawed view of what money is? As in, like, we had a commodity theory of money when we came up with central banks and what their legal mandate was. So now they really have very limited power, when ideally, if we were to have started with a credit theory of money, we would have given central banks the perhaps more expansive legal mandates, which would make more sense and give them more power.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. It's not so much true with the Federal Reserve Act, which was the sort of American institutional school had pretty good understanding of money in the monetary system when they designed it. But as it since came to be interpreted and limited by the understanding of like what institutional balances are best and what the division of labor is, then it's sort of the Fed has tended not to use authorities that it arguably legal has, like a Section 14 authority, for example. Lots of ways it can use that authority to allocate money or other debt obligations in a way that would serve its inflationary, its price stability mandate, because distribution and allocation are tied. That was something that was understood at this founding of the Fed, but has since sort of been limited in terms of implementation. And that's partly because of Friedman's thinking, I think, as well. But I mean, there's more to say about this, but the theory of money is tied there, because if you think of money as a neutral veil, and it's something you look through to see the real relations of production, then like Friedman, you think, well, we want to replicate this kind of soft gold standard. You need to just stop certain destabilizing trends, inflationary and deflationary. And so what you need the monetary system to do is just create a rising share of increasing, rising supply of money, but without inflation, without deflation, and just keep that steady. And then don't worry about allocation, right? So that picture of sort of monetary implementation comes from a certain view of money, that I don't think that it now informs the way the Fed's legal mandate is exercised, and the way that the politics and the legitimacy of Fed policy is shaped, and the way that shapes the way that the willingness of Fed officials to stretch their legal mandate or not, like they get advised by lawyers within the Fed. And so, but different cases like the ECB, for example, where its mandate was very much designed around more of later around sound money principles, expressly non-allocative and except in certain secondary, maybe technical ways. Its price stability mandate is first and foremost. This puts the euro at risk, unless you do certain ad hoc adjustments, and so I think that is shaped with a sort of more Friedman-like view of monetary management that I think you just wouldn't have if you had a better. Well, I don't know. It gained a lot of plausibility when the euro, the ECB was constructed, partly because of the residual effects of a going view, orthodox view of money, that doesn't see that money modulation and inflation and deflation is inherently tied with allocation. If you think those things are separable in a deep way, then the ECB plan legal mandates looks more sensible. If you think they're inextricably bind, then you think, well, there might be some division of labor making the more allocative roles having having fiscal authorities in charge of those, but still the monetary authority is still going to have some leeway on allocative issues, to fulfill its price stability, and then you might have better law around that gives it the appropriate things without having to do emergency measures, which is now what we've been pushed back to once crises come out like 2008 or COVID, and then both the Fed or ECB are then backed into invoking emergency powers, to do unusual allocative things. That's seen as illegitimate, suspicious, why don't you go stick to your real method, So anyway, behind the scenes there is a view of a theory of money that I think as well, it's still dominant or not fully worked through or something, but it's something that sort of constrains the institutional debate and debate about how to set and interpret legal mandates, existing legal mandates, still too much more than it should.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ron and Violet. And we have another question coming from the audience from Eric. And thank you very much, Eric, for joining us today.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for your presentation about your paper. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I think that you elucidated it really well. So maybe I have some understanding. Well, I wanted to ask about how you understood the role of money as part of a community in moral terms, because just to go back to the example you had of the tax administrator who won't take your money arbitrarily, and therefore subjects you to, say, going to jail or being further penalized. But I think that your view also underlines not just those ways in which freedom is infringed, but also the kind of freedom that maybe you would associate with someone like Hegel, where freedom is a matter of participating in a community, and by not allowing me to pay my taxes or my fines, you as the evil administrator are sort of disenfranchising me. Not in the sense of the poor being disenfranchised in Hegel, but you're sort of saying, you're not one of us. You can't make good. And I mean, not so much, and this doesn't have to be, because it could also be like, you're my buddy, right? And you're saying, okay, don't worry about it, I'll fudge the numbers. I think that still it would be kind of like a way of preventing me from establishing myself as a member in good standing in the community. And also then would be kind of a disenfranchisement, like a violation of a kind of egalitarian solidarity that I think, people might take seriously, apart from, going to jail for not paying your taxes.
Yeah, great question. Thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, so broadly speaking, you have sort of, as it were, communities that just don't run on money or don't depend very much on money, has a marginal role. And I still think they run on credit and debt relations of a sort of diffuse and informal kind. And they may not rise to the status of monetary credits and debts, but take a society like ours in which there's heavy reliance for all kinds of associations for food and shelter and like gainful employment. And all this depends on, well, that's gainful employment is a way to getting money. Then everything depends on, like, a lot depends in society about whether or not you can participate sort of in good faith and sort of cooperate with the larger social institutions. Everything depends on what your access is to money, right? Like, what kind of access do you have? I mean, there's ways of looking at this so it's patently illegitimate. So, for example, another way, a simple example I like is, suppose that, so you have an arbitrary dictator, a tyrant of old, right? And if he demanded in settlement of tax, imposes a tax obligation to him in the form of rare gems that everyone has to get on pain of incarceration, that's patently illegitimate, okay? But suppose he imposes a tax debt, suppose he does this instead, that's patently legitimate, it's bad for him, it's too much trouble, people don't like it. The subjects can't just take it, they revolt, So what he does is say, well, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to appoint a banker who issues IOUs, and then I'll only accept and settle. I'm going to impose a tax obligation. They're only that you can only settle the debt, the tax obligation, in that banker's IOUs. Okay, so now the banker has dictatorial power over who has what money. The banker creates the IOUs just as promissory obligations from nothing. They're just, and every decision about who gets a loan, that's a decision to give it to this person rather than this person, right? So now you now imagine where society is heavy reliance on money, but it's bankers, private bankers that decide on relatively arbitrary bases who gets what money. Okay, that sounds illegitimate too, right? You can see the mismatch, because basically now for me to function in life, function as part of society, paying debts for food, for shelter, for everything you need, for let alone a prosperous life, I have to go either get a banker to extend me credit, give me credit money, or maybe I have to go to an employer who got a loan from the banker, right? So now interestingly, if you just expand the number of bankers in this little model we're constructing, it's not that different from our actual system, because most money is created by private banks, authorized chartered by states, and this is relatively small share is actually created through public spending or public grants or by the government. And so but the risk of illegitimacy are still there, because your access to money isn't good enough. And that I think that does that. So my ability to relate with fellow citizens, to do all the, to be able to get a place to live, get food, I'm going to owe debts for that. And those debts are going to be, say, in dollars. And in order to settle those debts without stealing it, I need to have access to dollars, right? And everyone has to have this access to dollars. And so how do I get them? Well, now everything depends on my relation to either bankers or employers who will give me money in exchange for my time and service, who are getting their money from bankers. So, or to the extent the government's giving money or through subsidies or spending or whatever, there's some share of it there. But so now that the relationship, the money is now sort of mediating the whole relationship, and it can be just as arbitrary or illegitimate, I think, well, by different principles, as being sort of arbitrarily refused money by a dictator. A banker doesn't like a banker whose job, right, is to assess credit, which is to say, check the fingernails, we'll see whether you'll keep your promise to repay. But they look you up and down, and you're the wrong skin color, and maybe if you said you like sailing and you were white and tall, you'd get the loan, but you don't like sailing and you're not white, and you don't have independent collateral, you don't, so no, they'll pass on this loan, right? And now, so you can go you go to the next bank, they do the same thing, they discriminate. That you could be out of money now, unless short of going to an employer who's willing to give you money for your time. But how's the employers getting their money? Well, they're also doing it through some banking financial, either some debt or equity transaction that they're doing something similar based on. So there's a way that broader social legitimacy and the broader possibility of our being part of a scheme of cooperation that we can keep faith in. That is, this is Rawls's idea of the confidence. We can keep faith in it. I can participate in it without being subject to alienation or revolt, all out revolt. I can just want to blow up the system or whatever, but it could just be alienation. Like, okay, I'm being dragged along, I'm doing my job, but this sucks. I don't have good opportunities. Like maybe you start voting for a political candidate that promises to blow up the system, or or at least own the people who you blame for doing things to you, or whatever. That's the kind of lack of confidence in a system that Rawls thinks of as illegitimacy. And my basic big claim is this is inherently, in monetary societies like ours or anything close to ours, this is inherently about money and access to money and our connection to the banking and financial system and the state's relation to the financial system. That is all ignored in Rawls's picture and ignored in subsequent political philosophy, or just gestured at in the most vague way as so many instrumentalities. And I think that's what's missing is the sort of dynamics of the social dynamics of the social contract of a kind you're pointing to. Yeah, maybe more Hegelian, if you will. Yeah, because the community relations are part of what makes a social contract work.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Eric, for this interesting exchange. And the time is over, and so I think we can stop here. And I'll thank you. I thank you again, Aaron, and thanks,
Thank you so
Richard.
much.
And I hope to see you soon
Thank
on
you,
the next Financial Line events. Thanks again.
Thank
Great.
you. Have a
Thank
great
you,
evening,
guys.
everybody. Thank you,
Thanks so
Aaron.
much.
Bye.
Cheers.